Dr. Jaishankar, let me, and he's agreed to take a few questions from me, so thank you very much, Dr. Jaishankar. Let me start with what you said about the Quad, where you said relationships had enhanced and, the coming together of this. The spirit of the Quad was supposed to be security, but...
Sorry, I disagree with you there, but...
Yeah, I was coming to that question. That's what, we can talk about that. But this feeling is that partly because of COVID, this has moved to other issues of development, of health and security. So there's criticism that the Quad has avoided its main plank of containing China, countering China, and has now become something like the Asian Red Cross. Would you agree with this?
I think you underestimate what Red Crosses do. Look, let me say this as someone who's been involved not just in the change of our ties with Japan, but with the US and with Australia. You cannot nobody builds a relationship on one dimension. If a relationship moves, it moves on multiple fronts. So I disagree with the view that, as I said, I disagree with the view that Quad is fundamentally security driven. I think Quad is actually eventually a kind of a convergence of the interests of these four countries who are in four corners of the Indo-Pacific. And that set of interests, to me, is broad and open-ended. I mean, if you look at areas where Quad has moved, I mean, it could be from, let us say, from digital to health to education to maritime security to connectivity. So this, this is frankly, this is polemics in a way. It's like transposing. See, there was an era where the treaty walas defined the world. They still cannot believe that there is life without a treaty. So they are forcing a treaty on a non-treaty situation and say, if you're not conforming to this, you're not meeting a benchmark. The point is, something like Quad is a reflection of a completely different era. It's an era where four countries have decided that they are in a position to work together and contribute together. And sometimes, as I said, Red Cross makes a difference. Remember, the first time Quad came together actually was in a Red Cross situation, the 2004 tsunami. Okay? At that time, where was the deep concern about China? So let's not lose track of history. Let's not force a debate, which doesn't do justice to something which is a bigger effort, really.
Now, of course, China, Japan has concerns about China. We have serious concerns about China, particularly on the aggression, about its aggressive intent on our borders. If you take a look at what your your Chinese counterpart said, Wang Yi recently, he called the Quad the five eyes of intelligence, similar this thing. And he saw it as a sinister move that US was stoking tensions between China and India relations. And, is that something that you subscribe to, the view that this is largely US intended to strengthen?
Do I subscribe to a sinister view of Quad? I mean, first of all, Quad is four. Five eyes is five. So I learned my basic maths in second grade.
Well, he was talking about the alliance that was there between Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the US and UK.
I mean, everybody is entitled to their views. We are very clear about ours. I think the Quad is the Quad. And I don't think the Quad should be confused for something which may exist, which may have a different history, different background, different players. I think that kind of transposition, that's part of political argumentation.
Are we stepping too gingerly on the issue of containing or countering China on the Quad? Therefore, the AUKUS comes. We don't want to be India doesn't want to be part of that security alliance on that front?
Raj, don't be so defensive about the Quad. I'm doing the Quad because it's in my interest to do the Quad. I see merits in the Quad. I have benefits out of the Quad. I don't have to go and apologetically explain Quad to countries who may have a different view. If they have a different view, that's their problem. I am very clear what it is about. And what it is about, please look, by now we've had 2 Quad summits. We've had multiple meetings of foreign ministers. They have put out outcomes. And please look at those outcomes. And there is an element of Red Cross in those outcomes. So look, I think today it's very important not to allow your view to be defined by competitors. It is equally important not to allow new developments to be straitjacketed into old history. I think these are 2 challenges which the Quad faces. I think we should be confident about it. I see no reason to be apologetic about it. To my mind, it's a new kind of diplomacy. It's also, it shows in many ways a different way in each of these countries, the 4 countries, of how they are approaching the world. Because Quad has required each one of them to do their foreign policy a little bit differently. So these are, well, not straws in the wind, they're stronger than straws in the wind, but these are actually changing trends in international relations. So I would strongly contest any effort to demonize it or to straitjacket it or to define it in terms which make you kind of defensive about it.
Sure. I was just looking at the fact of China, and you didn't use the word China at all right through this entire answer that you had given me. And so let me also ask this question, because as we've said, there are common concerns that we have, and Quad was partly supposedly supposed to counter China or contain China. Arvind Kejriwal, the Chief Minister of Delhi, yesterday said that even though China continues to be aggressive on the LAC, as
we're
we saw
talking foreign policy.
Yeah, well, he's coming to foreign policy, and his question was, why is that? China, we've had the aggression in Tawang recently. Why is that India's trade continues to grow with China? In fact, it's grown from, he claims, from $65 billion to $95 billion. Why are we rewarding China? That's Kejriwal's question.
You want a serious debate or you want a Kejriwal question? Because the two are very different.
So let's just have a quick answer on that.
No, I'll give you a serious answer.
Right.
Because I think, this is posturing.
Right.
Look, what had happened after the 1990s, as we opened our economy, we opened our economy, which we should have. I don't think anybody sensible would dispute it. We opened our economy in a manner in which we did not use that openness to strengthen our SME sector. They actually were deeply impacted, negatively impacted by that openness, because they found themselves unable to compete with imports which were coming in from other economies which had greater scale, bigger scale, and greater state and systemic support. So I would argue that this era, what we call proudly as an era of reform, was also an era where we did great injustice to our SME sector. We did not build our supply chains. We did not support our domestic vendors. So what you saw in many ways was a hollowing out of many sectors. There are specific sectors which actually moved out of this country and went northwards. So what has happened, when somebody says, why are there imports coming out of China? There are imports coming out of China because for 30 years, you did not give your industry the kind of support and protection which you should have. It's only now in recent years that you have started to do it. Now, you cannot reverse in 5 or 10 years what you have done over 30 years. So today, for example, if you look at the PLI, the production-linked incentives, it is actually encouraging manufacturing to come to India. But yet you have schools of thought in this country, I don't want to take names, you know who I mean, who say, well, we shouldn't even be manufacturing. Our strength is in services. Now, a country like India cannot pass up the manufacturing option. In fact, when I spoke about Japan being an exemplar, one of the things which Japan has done, look at the SME sector in Japan. Look at the domestic supply chains in Japan. So, there may be those big Japanese companies which all of us know, but behind that are thousands of smaller Japanese companies who actually support them. Now, there are lessons to be learned from that. So, you know, this is not a question of suddenly I have a difficult relationship with a country, how do I switch it off? I mean, that's why I said that's not a serious remark. That's an, you know, you could say, well, you know what I mean.
Well, since we are on that subject, Rahul Gandhi, also, I don't know whether you consider a serious remark or non-serious remark, talked of the fact that India is hiding the Chinese.
You're trying to make my Monday morning?
This question, and then we'll move on, that India is hiding the fact that China has been, you know, has taken territory in the LAC and, you know, wants us not to, you know, to take on China. What is your view on this?
Today,
yeah.
I mean, you have yourself a fairly deep knowledge of the security situation. Today, you have a deployment of the Indian Army on the China border that we've never had. It's done in order to counter Chinese deployments which were scaled up massively since 2020. Now, if we were in denial, how is the army out there? Because the army didn't go there because Rahul Gandhi asked them to go. I mean, the army went there because the Prime Minister of India ordered them to go. So, look, at the end of it all, I understand today, politics is politics, okay? People will say things. They may not be credible. They may sometimes contradict their own positions, their own behavior. All that could happen. But the fact is, what is finally the proof of the pudding? The proof of the pudding is that the Indian Army today is deployed to counter any attempt to unilaterally change the LAC. So that's your answer.
And you're saying that's a fitting reply that India is giving to China?
No, I'm saying that is the obligation of the Indian state and that is the duty and commitment of the Indian military. You know, that we will not let any country, or in this case, China change the line of actual control unilaterally. So, you know, I think it's fairly obvious. I think most of the people of the country see that. So, you know, you can make your polemical points. I think people will treat it as politics.
Let's move to another area, and you were recently there at the UN Security, UN Security Council, where you, addressed a session on counter-terrorism. Mm-hmm. What is the kind? Japan is equally concerned about it, has been a partner with us. What can India and Japan do in terms of helping each other to counter terrorism? What is our position? Do you look for them in terms of intelligence, in terms of software developments, technologies that can handle? And you mentioned one of the aspects of that was, the kind of misuse of technology to foster terrorism. The 4 things that you said over there, one of that was that. Do you see any cooperation that India and Japan can have on terrorism?
No. Look, terrorism is a very complicated field because actually what happens in terrorism is everybody develops their capabilities and countries get into, you can say, sharing or informing or assessment, exchanging relationships. So I wouldn't necessarily single out terrorism. It could be broader than that. But when you have a good strategic relationship with any partner, then part of that is really to shape your, to have those exchanges, and then the systems get comfortable with each other, and there are benefits that flow from it. But the fact is that while we are, of course, both Asian countries, we are located at 2 very distinct sub-regions, which each have their own challenges. But in this day and age, look, you never know who's helpful where. I mean, you'll be amazed at the countries, with whom we work sometimes. So I would look at it much more in terms of fostering that kind of systemic comfort rather than necessarily narrowing it down to terrorism.
Now, on the subject of terrorism, India and Pakistan relations touched a new low with the strong language used by your counterpart, Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto. Your comments on the fact that of the way he spoke.
Sorry?
What do you say about the way he spoke? And
I think my ministry has said very clearly what we think about what he said. So,
which is, I mean,
no, which is out there. I think we've said what we had to say.
When you upset the way he spoke, the way he said everything that, talked of India and the way he talked of our Prime Minister?
Well, let's put it this way. Our expectations levels with the Pakistanis are never very high.
Okay. I know, we come back right to Japan. In terms of the fact that we are the G20 president, as well as Japan is the G7 presidency, how do you see us working together on some of the key issues of the world? Do you see some of the big things that we could take up together? We are the, G20 president, and Japan is the G7 presidency. Of course, G7 is represented over there, but is there ways we can work together to collaborate this?
Well, yes, because look, the G7, after all G7 members are G20 members. So together they are, more than a third of the G20 membership, and because they work as a group, they obviously are able to put their points of view across very, very strongly. So my sense is that when we look at the state of the world, look at issues today of debt, look at issues of digital challenges, health challenges, connectivity issues, there are, reform of multilateral institutions is something which Japan is as committed as we are. We are actually partners when it comes to some aspects of it. My sense is there will be a significant convergence between what the G7 under Japan is trying to do and what the G20 under India is trying to do. Our effort, we want to run a G20 which is very, very broad-based, which takes in as much inputs from as many parts of the world as possible, so that what it produces is actually serious and relevant and, in a sense, meets the demands of the day. So my sense is that you will see India and Japan working very closely on this G7, G20 connect.
Now, one of the issues is the global value chain, and this is my final question to you. India had hoped that the China plus one means India. What can, and Japan seems to, as you had mentioned earlier, look towards ASEAN countries in terms of investment, in terms of manufacturing, not looking at India. What do you think could turn the relationship on this? What is it that we can do ourselves, and what can Japan do to ensure that we become a greater part of the global value chain and be, seen as an alternative to China in some senses?
This is a fundamental question which has arisen, not just for Japan and India, not just for Japan, but for the entire world from the COVID experience. The COVID experience actually taught us what happens when there is over-concentration in a particular region, and I'm not saying this as a political point, any region or any country. If there is over-concentration, you have actually multiplied the risks. So you had COVID. Now COVID shut down a certain geography, and then the entire world was impacted. Okay, today it is COVID. Tomorrow it could be something else. It could be a massive climate event. It's very, I would say today the global economic security requires actually a much more decentralized globalization. It needs multiple production sectors. It needs redundant, resilient supply chains. more reliable supply chains, multiple supply chains. So the effort of the Modi government today to build up greater manufacturing in this country, to my mind, actually captures this moment when there is a demand in the world also to see more centers of manufacturing. And it's in, if you have to, every country will de-risk today its future by having multiple relationships. It can be in manufacturing, it could even be in food, it could be in health. So I see a new conceptual, a very pragmatic basis today why India, Japan should actually get more strongly into a supply chain relationship, both for their own mutual good as well as a contribution to the world. And in fact, we have an initiative along with Australia, three of us, to actually look at more reliable, how to build more reliable supply chains in this part of the world.
I know your time's up and you've got to attend Parliament. Thank you very much, Dr. Jaishankar, for this. Let's give him a very warm round of applause for this one. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you, Raj. Could I also request Faisal Ashraf, the Managing Director at Mitsui & Co., to join us on stage to felicitate and present a token of appreciation to the Speaker.